We'll get started. All right, let's begin. Great to see everybody here. Hey, Tamara and Jerry.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Great to see everybody here on a Monday night. Um, I was just talking with Rav Hody today, and we were remarking at how fun it's been to be teaching this class and in this new format, the Shabbat in person after Kiddush, the Zoom, the recordings. And it's really wonderful to see how folks are engaged in this conversation. That was our hope. Our hope was to create conversation, dialogue around some of the key religious, hashkafic, philosophical issues that face our community. And it's happening, and that's really fulfilling to see. So it's already been a great success. And I'll do a quick summary of the first two classes and then jump into our first real halachic topic that we've tackled. And that's going to be about gender and men and women and mitzvot. So we're going right to it, which is really great. So to review, first class, we talked a little bit about a very ancient Masorah, a very ancient Torah ideology of rigor and rootedness and compassion and understanding and engagement with the world and openness and fidelity to tradition all at the same time. And how that's not a new idea. That's, a very authentic Torah idea from the beginning. Last week, Rav Hodi gave a beautiful shiur about the challenge of modernity, how we have a Torah tradition that exists for thousands of years, and then there's these new ideas that come up with enlightenment and modernity, and um, they directly challenge many of our Torah's ideas. And how do we deal with those challenges? And we talked about the reform on one hand, which really fully embraces modernity and is willing to break with things that feel pre-modern or old-fashioned, just really change and uproot. We have the Haredi movement, ultra-Orthodoxy, on another side, which is also an innovation, which claims that nothing can be new, even though, of course, there's always been innovation and newness, but there's a new innovation that says there can be no new innovation. That's Chadash Asar Min HaTorah. And then we have, those Rav Hirsch, Rav Hildesheimer, early on, and then continuing with Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Yitz Greenberg, and Eliezer Berkowitz from Skokie, and many others who are seeking to engage modernity, who are saying we should not be afraid of modernity. That doesn't mean we should embrace everything about modernity. We need to really carefully look and think and reflect and take seriously, the questions that are arising, but also take seriously our fidelity to tradition. We need to be conservative, small c conservative, like not just rushing to change, but really keeping things as they are and then seeing where either it's philosophical or halachic innovation, like where that makes sense, but not just jumping headfirst into those things. And that's, roughly what we're calling a modern orthodoxy today. That's what we've done so far. And tonight we're going to deal with a major challenge that comes with modernity. To the Jewish tradition and to all the Jewish tradition, but it's very acutely to orthodoxy, and that is the challenge of feminism. So feminism is a modern ideal philosophy, philosophical approach. I'm not an expert on feminism. I'm not going to capable of discussing first wave, second wave, third wave. I'm not going to pretend to be able to do that. We'll share some links in the group of people who are much more knowledgeable to read some of those more deeply. But basically, the big challenges that feminism poses to orthodoxy can be, we can identify a couple areas where there are significant challenges. One is a kind of philosophical challenge, right? Feminism makes a claim that liberty and equality, people are equal, and we can justify and people should have equal rights under the law. There shouldn't be differences based on one's gender. So that is a challenge because in Judaism, traditional Judaism, um, there are differences. There are not, law does not treat men and women fully equally. We'll get into that tonight. There are different roles, etc. So that's a challenge. There are economic challenges that feminism brings, where we have the kind of the separation of home and workplace and increasing women's economic power. That's a challenge that's going to come to Orthodoxy and the challenges associated with gender roles and what women are able to do as women are more educated, live longer lives, right? The idea of a woman just being in the home solely is outdated because we have women doing lots of things in the world. That's a challenge. We have legal challenges. In the secular world, women are granted much more legal rights, property rights, personhood rights, divorce rights, and that is also going to pose challenge to some aspects of our halachic system, which are different sometimes. So all these areas are going to be a challenge to orthodoxy, and as you know, what we're preaching from this class, modern orthodoxy, is we can't ignore the challenges, right? All of us in this class live in some form in the modern world. We are not living sequestered lives solely in like a Haredi Jewish bubble. It's sort of intellectually dishonest to just ignore the challenges. And also, we don't want to ignore our sources. We want to treat our sources with reverence and really hear what they're trying to say and bring them together and see what emerges. So that's the goal of tonight. Um, I'm going to share my screen. We'll share the sources. Let's see. Okay. Gender and Mitzvot. Everybody can see that?
Could you
Yes.
make the type a little larger?
Yes, I can. Let's do that.
Let him do it.
Is that better?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Sure. Okay. So our class tonight is titled Gender and Mitzvot, Exclusion, Exemption, Empowerment. Um, One thing I want to say before we jump in, I did two things actually I want to say, and then we'll start with the sources. First is Um, just as I'm not a scholar of feminism and feminist philosophy theory, there are also many wonderful scholars of these areas of halacha. I'm not going to claim to be, the world's greatest halachist on these issues, including many in our community. We are blessed to have amazing, I gave this year on Shabbat. Rabbi Marianne Novak was in the room. Dr. Lizzie Martin is in the room. Rabbi Nietzsche L is going to be teaching next week. So I'm presenting these sources and these ideas as a man who doesn't have a female perspective, obviously, and who's acknowledging that I am not the sole voice or authority on these. And there are many people in our community who are very worth listening to and should be listened to and learned from on these topics. And we thought it was important that, as you know, me as the senior rabbi of the shul, who is responsible for ultimately the direction and the psak of the shul, to share my perspective on it, so everyone can see, where the spiritual leadership is coming from, and engage and challenge and discuss. So that's kind of that's a preamble. The other preamble is Judaism actually, and we'll get into this a little bit in the shiur. The Torah, while maybe not feminist, um, time and time again from the very Torah's inception, I believe, and this is maybe another shiur, is consistently, um, especially compared with its context, it's consistently lifting up women's voices, um, offering greater expansion of roles and responsibilities to women, um, and like a kind of a proto-feminism. And I know one can, if when we read the Torah today, sometimes it seems like very, outdated. But I think there's a really compelling case to be made that the Torah is well ahead of its time in granting women many different kinds of rights and viewing women as persons and giving them autonomy and agency. So I do want to say that. I don't think the Torah is like sexist. I think, it's it comes from a certain time and it speaks in the lashon of people, but I think in many ways it's actually very progressive. But tonight we're going to talk about halacha. We're not going to talk about Torah stories, and about the development of law. and how that law very much plays out in our community. And we're going to start with a quote from Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, 20th century, Gadol Gaon of modern Orthodoxy. So he writes, "There's no doubt that in the eyes of the halacha, men and women enjoy equal status and have the same worth as far as their humanitas is concerned. Both were created in the image of God. Both join the covenantal community at Sinai. Both are committed to our meta-historical destiny. Both crave and search for God, and with both he engages in a dialogue." Very beautiful, very profound. I like this statement a lot. And also, when someone says there is no doubt, or when someone begins a statement saying there is no doubt, usually means there's a doubt. Right? There's a doubt. And if we're honest about certainly a halacha, I think it's more than a doubt. Men and women are not equal in halacha, in traditional halacha. That's not true. So I'm curious what he meant exactly by that. Maybe we can another shir can explain what the Rav meant. But the next source where we saw Berman, um, he has a very important article which we'll share in the group, "The Status of Women in Halachic Judaism." This is from 1973. Rabbi Saul Berman, also a leading figure, brain, genius, Gaon of modern Orthodoxy, and one of my teachers at Yeshivat Chovei Torah. So he writes very powerfully. The first step when talking about this question is a moratorium on apologetics. It is one thing to recognize the problems and to attempt to understand the theological, halachic, economic, and cultural factors which produce them. It is proper and indeed vital that we discover and define the values and or social conditions which gave rise to the position of Jewish women. So he says we should engage, we should talk, we should learn, we should think, but it's a completely different matter, both dishonest and dysfunctional, to attempt through homiletics and scholasticism to transform problems into solutions and to reinterpret discrimination to be beneficial. And
Mm.
so I think what he's speaking to is a phenomena that might have happened, I think still happens. A young woman grows up in the Orthodox community. Um, here's someone say Shalom Asani Isha from the Amud, the bracha, "Thank you God for not having made me a woman," is upset, goes to the rabbi, and the rabbi kind of gives sort of like an apologetic answer that doesn't acknowledge the pain. It doesn't acknowledge that there's something here that you are feeling and it's legitimate, and tries to kind of dance around it. Scholasticism or kind of clever solutions which don't address the fundamental issues underlying it. So that's what he's speaking against, and I personally like that approach very much. I think we should be honest and real and think about it and see what our tradition teaches us rather than try to paper things over. Okay, I think I see somebody was there a question? All right, if someone has a question, feel free I'm trying to keep an eye on that little hand raising thing, but um, I don't always do so well at that. So you can jump in and say something if at any point. All right, so let's talk about as a shul, I think the most significant difference, halachic difference, and sometimes for some people upsetting, for some people not upsetting. Also worth saying that, men and women, everybody has very different responses and reactions to some of these issues. Some people are very troubled by gender differences in Torah. Some people think it's great. Some people don't notice it. So, there's no single reaction that everyone should have when encountering these sources. But what many people um, in our shul are affected by, and maybe they consciously know it's what's going on, or just sort of are kind of aware of it on some level, is the difference in levels of obligation in mitzvot between men and women. There are different levels of obligation, and as we're going to see, the nafka mina, the outcome of that, plays out in very concrete ways in our community. So first, let's kind of define our terms and establish some concepts, and then we'll go into the discussion. So we like mitzvot. We're Jews. We're Torah Jews. Mitzvot are really great. Everybody has mitzvot, men and women. There are four types of mitzvot. There are positive mitzvot and negative mitzvot. Positive mitzvot, do something, love your neighbor, blow the shofar. Commandments, don't kill anybody, don't work on Shabbat, don't, etc. There are within each of those, positive and negative, There are time-bound and non-time-bound. So a positive time-bound mitzvah, eat matzah on the 8 days of Pesach, or at least on the first day, machloket. A positive non-time-bound mitzvah, love your neighbor as yourself. Love the stranger. You should always love the stranger. Doesn't matter what day it is, doesn't matter what month it is. Negative also has the same. Negative time-bound mitzvot, don't work on Shabbat, but you can work the other 6 days, so it's time-bound, negative. Negative non-time-bound mitzvot, don't ever steal. Doesn't matter what day of the week it is. Okay? So four categories of mitzvot. Out of those four, men and women are equally obligated in three. Equally obligated in positive, non-time-bound mitzvot. We all have to love strangers. We're equally obligated in negative, time-bound mitzvot. We can all not eat chametz on Pesach, and equally obligated in uh, what it is, negative, non-time-bound mitzvot. Men and women cannot kill, never. Three out of four equal. The one where there's a difference, as it says in the Mishnah Kiddushin, Kol mitzvot aseh shehazman grama. All positive mitzvot that are time bound, that are time affected, shehazman grama. Anashim chayvim and anashim k'turot. Men are obligated and women are not obligated. So what is an example of a positive time-bound mitzvah? So we can think about things like Kiddush on Shabbat. Friday nights, there's a mitzvah to make Kiddush. Um, Eating matzah at the Seder, hearing the Megillah, shaking the lulav, sitting in the sukkah. So as we can see, the positive time-bound mitzvot wind up actually being some pretty significant mitzvot in terms of ritual Jewish life, right? These are significant. Kiddush, lulav, sukkah, shofar, matzah, holidays, Shabbat. These are pretty, visible communal Jewish ritual things. So even though it's only one out of the four categories, it does have an impact in terms of the level of obligation. So now we have to ask ourselves, okay, so why are women exempted? Not forbidden, by the way, very important. Exempted, patur, not asur, forbidden. So why is there this exemption? Why does the mission have this idea that there should be an exemption for a woman from time-bound mitzvot? So I'm going to show you three sources that, or four actually, that kind of lay out some of the basic trends in pre-modern and modern thinking on this topic. So the first suggestion is given by the Abu Draham, um, and he has an idea that you may have, and all these you may have heard at some point people say in different ways. But basically, the reason that a woman is not obligated to fulfill mitzvot is because she is subjugated to her husband. Abu Draham writing, I think 13th century, I believe Spain, medieval. So his idea is that a woman's role is to serve, not to not be like actively doing things to serve Hashem in terms of positive mitzvot, but really to be focused on fulfilling her husband's needs. And that's going to impede her ability to perform positive time-bound mitzvot. Davening is another example. Positive time-bound mitzvah, daven 3 times a day. It's a lot of time. Men are obligated to pray 3 times a day. If a woman's job, according to Abu Draham, is to serve her husband, serve her family, that's her role. So you can't have both. It's not going to work. If she was obligated in a time-bound positive commandment, it's possible that she's doing the commandment, her husband will command her to do something, right? Hey, go wash the dishes. I'm davening. There's going to be some kind of conflict. If she puts aside her husband's command to do God's, woe unto her from her husband. If she puts aside God's command to fulfill her husband's command, woe to her from her creator. She's going to be disappointing and letting somebody down. Therefore, God exempted her from positive time-bound mitzvot so she can have peace with her husband. Abu Draham says, don't be astonished by this. To modern ears, this obviously probably sounds not so modern, to put it lightly. Um, but I think it's important to see it and understand it. So, and actually, there's sort of a beautiful thing here. We see that God is even willing to have his name erased in order to have peace between a man and his wife. right? So what he's saying is like God is willing for women to do less mitzvot in order for there to be shalom bayit. That's the Avudraham. First idea, familial role and status kind of trumps these positive mitzvot. Next idea, Rav Hirsch. You may have heard this. Rav Hirsch says this. We also see this in some mystical literature, some Hasidus. Basically, what Rav Hirsch is saying, and I'll just summarize it, is that women don't need positive mitzvot. Women don't need them. They're like on a higher level. The Torah takes it for granted that women has great fervor and faithful enthusiasm for her calling, and the temptations awaiting her in the sphere of her calling pose but little danger to her. Right, so positive time-bound mitzvot, like things like davening 3 times a day, are meant to help men, stay focused and not get distracted and not get tempted by stuff. Women don't need that. They have more passion. They're on a higher level. They don't need positive time-bound mitzvot, and that's why they're exempt. That's why they're exempt from them. Um, right. A man needs repeated exhortation to remain true to his calling, right? Men, they don't get it. They have to be very disciplined. Women don't need that. This is like an essentialist idea. There's an essential difference in the kind of spiritual character of men and women. Um, and because of this essential difference, like we have different mitzvot. So first idea, woman's role subservient to husband. Second idea, women and men are spiritually essentially different. Women are not subject to the same temptations and things that men are. Um, first two. Next, we'll see Rav Moshe Feinstein. This is Egon Moshe. Or sorry, Rav Hirsch is writing in the 1800s in Germany. Beginning of modernity, kind of post-Enlightenment, beginning of modernity. Um, Rav Moshe Feinstein, writing in the 20th century, in the thick of modernity, modern Orthodoxy is already a thing when Rav Moshe is writing. He's not a modern Orth. He would not consider himself a modern Orthodox posek. He was Haredi, but also he was very innovative and creative in many ways. Um, so he has kind of like a hybrid between something between essential nature of women and the role of women. The average women of the world are not rich and are responsible for raising the boys and girls. Now, by the way, this is already noticing a change that's happening. There are some women that are rich, and those rich women, maybe they're already always were this women, but there's probably more of them in the 1950s, and there's certainly more now, who are not solely responsible for raising children.
Got it this morning.
And this is a big question, of course, for us today. Like, what does it mean if there are women who spend, may even raise children, but are also working in careers and may only spend a fraction of their lives raising children, right? Pre-modernity, a woman might spend the vast majority of her life, right? If the lifespan is till the mid 40s and the kind of child marriage age begins in the teens, right? So you're really spending the bulk of your life raising children and engaging children, family life. Very different than today. The lifespan might be 80 or 90, and you know, grade school, high school, college, graduate school, maybe 10 or 15 years, 20 years of child raising, and then another, where are we at? Another 40 years of life after that, which is not in child raising. And even when you're child raising, it might be done, you might be rich and might having it be done by nannies, babysitters, schools, right? So he's noticing that like things are changing a little bit. I think that's this point here. Um, and he says this is but the average woman is not like that. And it's the most important labor to God in the Torah is to be raising children. For that's what Rosh says for a woman. For the nature of women is also more suited for child reading. Therefore, God was lenient with them so as to not obligate them in learning Torah and in positive time-bound mitzvot. Therefore, even if the order of life in the world should change for all women, and again, Rav Moshe writing in the 1950s, the order of life is changing for women in many parts of the world. Not all women, but many. And for the wealthy in all eras, and even when it's possible to give over the child rearing to some men and women, as in our country. Oh, all of a sudden dads are involved in child rearing. Like, what does that mean? The law of the Torah has not changed, and neither has rabbinic law. So we're not changing it, says Rav Moshe. It's kind of, even if there is societal change, there's something essential. We're going to keep this. Finally, Rabbi Saul Berman. and his view is going to focus most on social role, the social role of women in society and in different societies. So Rev. Berman in the same article says, while not demanding adherence to one particular role, it is nevertheless clear that since for most of our history, our continuation as a people depended upon the voluntary selection by women of the role of wife, mother, homemaker. I would quibble with the voluntary piece, but okay. The law would and did encourage the exercise of that choice. Exemption would be a tool used by the Torah to achieve a particular social goal, namely to assure that no legal obligation would interfere with the selection by Jewish women of a role which was centered almost exclusively in the home. However, it is vital to emphasize that even with these exemptions, the wife, mother, homemaker role is not the mandated or exclusively proper role, though it is clearly a preferred and therefore protected role. So what Rabbi Berman is saying is that we want Jewish continuity. That's always been a thing that we really, really want. And to have Jewish continuity, which means Jewish children, Jewish families, that depended upon, for all of our history, upon women choosing to be home and to raise children. Without that choice, we would not exist. And to incentivize that choice, to encourage that choice, to make it possible for people to make that choice and not be racked with religious guilt, we said, okay, those positive time on mitzvot, which are going to interfere, davening 3 times a day is going to interfere with child raising. I'll tell you, when times when, Becca was out of town and I'm the single dad, I'm trying to daven 3 times a day, very hard, very difficult, with little kids running around. So there's an exemption created by the sages in the Mishnah to incentivize and encourage women to continue to ensure the continuity of our people by staying home and raising children. These, I'd say, are the main thrusts of the ideas about why we have this difference. What is the reason for this difference in obligation? Any questions, technical, philosophical, on this so far? Okay, so now it's going to get a little interesting. So we have this rule, right? The rule, women are not obligated in time-bound mitzvot. The rule, by the way, there's about 14 mitzvot out of
Like
613. There are
everybody's seeing different
14
stuff. Let me tell you what I'm seeing that I don't like. I am seeing.
There are 14 of these mitzvot, which is not that many out of 613, small percentage. Um, and within those 14, something curious is we're going to notice in the Gemara. So we're going to go back. We were in the kind of pre-modern, modern sources, of Soloveitchik, Rav Hirsch, and Rav Moshe Feinstein. We're now going back 2,000 years to the Gemara itself. Remember, it was the Mishnah that said that women are not obligated in positive time of mitzvot. Now let's see the Gemara's kind of discussion of some of those mitzvot. So Gemara Brachot says, um, women are obligated in not violating Shabbat, right? That's Shamor. When we think of Shabbat, we have like Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad, remember and keep. So we think about the Shmirah, the Shamor is all the don't do's, and the Sachor is the do's. So the Shamor of Shabbat is don't make a fire, don't do labor, don't do all that stuff. The Zachors are make Kiddush, enjoy yourself, the positive mitzvot of Shabbat. So the Gemara noticed, said, you know what? They're obligated in all the negative ones. Let's obligate them in the positive one too. Women should be obligated in Kiddush. And so they are. By the way, women are fully obligated from a Torah level in Kiddush Friday night, even though it is a positive time-bound mitzvah, even though it would seem to have been exempted by the Mishnah statement. Chazal say no, they're obligated. We're going to obligate them. Women have to participate in Kiddush on Friday night. If a woman is alone, got to make Kiddush, right? Women have to hear Kiddush. Another example, you know, technically women don't have to eat matzah because it is a positive time-bound mitzvah, but they were the Gemara says, but they are. We are gonna nashim chayavot be'achlet matzah dvar Torah. It is, they are. Chazal again sort of make a choice and say women have to eat matzah on Pesach, even though according to the rule they don't. So with Megillah. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Nashim chayvot b'mikra Megillah. Women have to hear Megillah. Shaf hein hayu b'toanes. They were part of that miracle. These are three. I think there's a total of six out of the 14, where the rabbis have their rule. Women are not obligated in positive time on mitzvot, but over and over again choose to include. Choose to say, we're going to expand the circle of obligation here, and we're going to make women obligated in these things. And these are also, as we talked about, these are very kind of significant, essential, like high visibility mitzvot. Megillah, matzah, kiddush, right? These aren't like, this isn't like a mitzvah that people don't really know about or are not aware of. These are like very public, high profile mitzvot. And Chazal are choosing not to say it's fine if they do them, but to say they have to do them to increase to make them obligated. That's interesting. We also see something develop in the halachic literature later on that we're now going to go into Rishonim and a few Achronim, who are going to say another interesting thing about women and mitzvot. They're going to say that, there are things that women have just made themselves obligated in, like the shofar, right? My guess is every single person on this call, whatever gender, feels like on Rosh Hashanah, I got to hear the shofar. I need to hear that shofar. So, according to the rule, the Mishnah that we saw earlier, women would not be obligated. It's a positive time-bound mitzvah, right? It is something that happens. It's a positive thing that happens once a year. So, women should not be obligated. But the Rishonim noticed, they bring themselves into the obligation. They just do it. They keep showing up. The Maharil says, indeed, women are exempt from shofar. It's a positive time-bound commandment, but they bring themselves into the obligation. And since they obligate themselves, they must make haste to prepare their needs, whether in adornment or in cooked dishes, to be available to come to shul and be there to hear the shofar. And they can't make the people wait like they're obligated like everybody else because they've really brought it on themselves. That's what Akiva Eger says here, that our women are stringent for themselves and are scrupulous and eager to fulfill most time-bound mitzvot, like the shofar, the sukkah, lulav, and kiddush and yom tov. It's as if they've accepted it upon themselves. So we see like these rabbis are noticing these women really want our women in our communities and wherever we are over hundreds of years, they are yearning and showing up and fruum about these mitzvot. And actually, we're going to grant them a kind of, not grant them, but we're going to recognize that as a level of obligation. Like they are now chayav in these mitzvot. It's a very striking idea, sort of an obligation from the grassroots, not from top down, but from bottom up. By just doing it over and over again, okay, they're chayav. Women have to hear the shofar. You better hear the shofar. Everyone's obligated. So that's interesting. So again, we have Chazal expanding the circle of obligation, identifying specific mitzvot that didn't have to be obligated, that now they are. And then we see rabbis recognizing the religious yearnings of women to participate and to have these levels of obligation and saying, yeah, that's a real obligation too. Okay. Any questions on that? Great. Um, What about fulfilling the obligations of others? So this is also where it really comes into play. You could say for the first part, okay, they're not obligated, but they can do it. So fine, like what's the big deal? You're obligated, you're not obligated, like you're hearing shofar, it's great. Like who cares? But there's a big nafkamina, a big outcome when we talk about levels of obligation between obligated and participating but not obligated. And this has to do with communal leadership, prayer leading, doing mitzvot for the community. Um, this is a big one that's important to talk about. So the Mishnah says as a general rule about fulfilling obligations for others. Um, Before the Mishnah, we can fulfill obligations for others, right? If you've ever heard someone, if you've been at a Shabbat table and one person says motzi, we're all obligated to say the motzi, but the one person who said it does it for all of us, right? We can think of many examples of this where one person can do something on behalf of others and it counts. We're all in that. So how does that work? Ze'aklal, kol she'enu mechayev, enu mechuyev b'davar, enu motzi et harabim yidei chovatam. In order to fulfill someone's obligation, you have to have the same level of obligation. Okay, so if Sari and I are equally obligated to recite Hamotzi, which we are, we're both obligated to recite the blessing of Hamotzi before eating some bread at the same to the same degree. Either one of us can say the blessing for the other, and as long as we listen and say Amen, we have both fulfilled our obligations. But what if there's a different level of obligation? What if I'm obligated and someone else is not obligated? What if, let's go forget the gender for a second. What if we're at my Shabbat table and my son wants to say Hamotzi, but he's not a bar mitzvah yet. So he has a different level of obligation than I do. I can't rely on his Hamotzi. He could say it, but then I have to say it again for myself because he can't fulfill my obligation because as a minor, he has a different level of obligation than I do. This very much comes into play with prayer, with tefillah, right? Because in tefillah, as we've discussed a little bit earlier, it's a positive time-bound commandment. It happens every day, 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night. Um, our rabbis did not choose to include women in the obligation of 3 times a day. They do say 1 time a day. There's an obligation daily, but not 3 times a day. So therefore, a woman cannot fulfill my obligation in prayers because I have a different level of obligation. And that's why women don't lead services in Orthodox synagogues. It's not because they're less than, it's not because, we don't like them. It's because when the prayer leader gets up, part of what he or she is doing, and part of what the prayer leader is doing, is fulfilling the obligations of the community. Right? The prayer leader is going to recite the Amidah, a repetition of the Amidah. Um, when they do that, the idea is if there was someone who didn't say it or didn't know how, by saying it, they're fulfilling the obligation of everyone in the room who might have not said it or didn't understand. Therefore, that person needs to have the highest level of obligation in that room. You can't have someone trying to fulfill the obligations of the room if they're on a lower obligation level. Okay? Any questions about that? That's an important concept. Great.
Hi, I
Yes.
have a question.
Yeah.
Um, it, this might be something to circle back to, but in the previous source, you said that or not you, I'm sorry, I can't scroll up to see who
Sorry.
the source was. Yeah, Rabbi Akiva Eger. He says that it is as if they have accepted it upon themselves, which implies that it is possible to accept upon oneself a mitzvah and then that that's an equally um that that acceptance of that obligation raises your raises your level of obligation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
It's a
y-
great
d-
point. So Ariel is saying, well, if I think what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if someone did accept that level of obligation on themselves, then therefore now they're obligated. So could they fulfill someone else's obligation? Like let's say someone, kind of leveled up, right? A woman says, I'm going to accept upon myself the obligation to pray 3 times a day. I'm going to daven 3 times a day every day. I'm going to take a netter for it, maybe even. I'm going to make a vow. Now I have that level of obligation. Can I then fulfill the obligations of others? Could I fill the obligation of a man who has that similar level of obligation? It's a great question. Um, Kivier he does say v'have keki blue. It is as if, and that ke I think is like a big ke. I'm not sure if he's like how far do we take that, right? On a one-to-one level, could it work? On a communal level, could it work? I think that's a really I don't have the answer to that. I'm not holding in those halachas and how far we extend that. But the question stands. I think it's an important question. Yes, Sari.
Um, I'm not sure my question fits in right now either, so tell me if it will fit in later. But when we talk about the level of obligation in the room, if there are men who came home from shul and women who haven't yet heard or said kiddush, it seems to me that the women should, not just can, but should be the ones to say Kiddush for the family because if they weren't in shul, they haven't heard Kiddush at all yet.
Yeah, good question. So, on one foot, and again, so this year, this is not, we're not going to go halacha lemasa for any specific, like practical halacha. I'm just trying to lay out some of the concepts. And each of these cases, there's a lot there. We'll say with Kiddush and Shul, there is there's an idea of Kiddush with Makom Suda, right? Actually, if you heard Kiddush and Shul, you actually do have to make Kiddush again when you get home because you have to do it in the place where you ate. But I think, again, that question stands. Like if someone, like it's worth thinking about, um, are you relying on someone else's, like, like shofar might be a good example, right? Like, do you need a man to come to your house to blow shofar? Or could you blow shofar for yourself, right? And for the women, like so. I think these are important things
Would it
to
be
explore.
better? Also,
Would it be better?
Havdalah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, great question. Okay, now let's keep going. So we've established that it requires an equal level of obligation to fulfill someone else's, to do it for somebody else, to discharge the obligation of another. This is a little quote from Derachea, which is a wonderful website out of Israel. Discusses a lot of issues of women, men, halacha. It's very, very good. It comes out of is it Matan? I'm blanking now. It's like a lot of like kind of the Lindbaum, Matan, that world. It's a great world. So they say, for example, Leah can recite Kiddush for men and women because she's obligated in Kiddush on a Torah level like them, right? Maybe kind of people may know this, may not know this, but like a woman can recite Kiddush at the Shabbos table Friday night. It's actually maybe Shabbos day, it's more of machlokas, it's Rabbanan, unclear. But Friday night, which is the bigger Kiddush, a woman has the exact same level of obligation as a man and could recite it for the table. That's just the basic halacha there. Rashi mentions a similar idea with Megillah, right? We saw earlier Chazal said women are obligated in Megillah just like men. Boom. They have to do it. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that they are able to read it and they can fulfill men's obligations. That may be a surprise to some. Like, whoa, a woman can fulfill the mitzvah obligation of Megillah for a man. Because it's the same obligation. Um, right, Kiddush, okay, Kolba, fine. Also benching. Men and women are equally obligated to recite Birkat Hamazon. But now here it gets a little interesting. So Isha mevarechet lebala, a wife can do benching for her husband. Aval amru chachamim, but the chachamim say tavo ma'ara le'adam shishto ubenav mevarachin lo. But a curse will come upon a person whose wife and sons bless for him. So this is an interesting Gemara. The Gemara says that women are legally fully able to do it, and the second clause doesn't challenge that first clause. It doesn't say no, they're not. It says yes, they are, but that man will be cursed. So what do you think? Well, what is the Gemara trying to say? Why would a man be cursed if a woman? Why would the Gemara suggest that? What do you think it's implying here? Any ideas?
In this particular case, it's a matter of giving thanks. Is
Okay.
that relevant? Just like Berkata Gomel?
So like the thanks should come from the man more than the woman somehow?
Well, not less. I don't know.
Okay. Any other ideas? Why is the Gemara saying this? So the big reveal. When they say a curse, this is the tshuva of the Gaonim. So this is very old. Gaonim, 9th century, 10th century CE. Why should he be cursed? It's someone who's negligent and didn't learn. It's someone who doesn't know how, either they don't know how to bench, right? The man doesn't know how to bench, or they like don't want to bench, or they're lazy. It's like a bad thing. It's an embarrassment. In a world where women were not typically educated or literate, and men typically were, to have a woman benching would often imply that there was something very wrong with the man, that he wasn't, you know, he didn't know how. It was not a good look for the family to have a woman being able to perform those obligations for a man. The Gaon continues to say, but someone who did learn, maybe they're sick, they're old, you do it for me. That's fine, right? There's no issue with that. So here we have, and this concept of like a woman doing something will be an embarrassment or a poor reflection on a family or on a community. This is an idea in the Gemara and still today in many circles. And it's a complicated idea because is it like an objective reality? Like if a woman does certain things, it's objectively bad. It's objectively an embarrassment. Or is it subjective, right? In a world where the men are supposed to be able to read and the women are not, and the man can't read and the woman can, that's like somehow an embarrassment for the family. But in a world where women are getting PhDs and are, at the highest levels of society, it'd be an embarrassment if a woman couldn't read, right? And like, what is how do we think about that concept of embarrassment? This is, by the way, and I think we'll discuss this. Rabbi Yale is going to discuss this next week. This is the conversation around women receiving aliyot and reading from the Torah. The Gemara says women can read from the Torah. The Gemara says women can read from the Torah. But the Gemara says it is a denigration of the kavod hatzibur, of the honor of the community, if a woman reads from the Torah. So what does that mean? Is it because it would imply that there's not enough men who know how to read in that community? And that would be embarrassing? Probably. Or is it some kind of objective thing? Like a woman reading from the Torah is, no matter if, there's a million learned men and a million learned women, like there's something about that which is just harms the dignity of the community. Depending how you view that, that's going to lead you to different ways. And that's going to be a big question when we talk about next week with Rabbi H.L. and prayer spaces and partnership minyanim and women's tefillah and all that stuff. But this is like going to be a hinge point. But halachically, it's important to know the Gemara says there's no halachic issue in terms of obligations or whatever with a woman reading the Torah, with a woman saying Kiddush, with a woman reading from the Megillah. Those are all fine based on this concept of obligation. Um, okay. Aruch HaShulchan also has this, talk public verse. Oh, Judy's got a question. Go ahead, Judy.
So I'm just trying to understand what you're saying then. So the Gemara says it's acceptable, but it's more on how people feel about it and women reading from the Torah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna save that sugya for later, but let's just talk about benching. The Gemara says it's acceptable, like it's legally totally fine, halachically, in terms of the law, it is fine, but it's a reflects poorly in that context on the family, so you shouldn't do it. But it's also okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then again, like how we understand that second clause, that should, will take us in different directions. If we understand the Gemara speaking, kind of eternally and objectively, it's always bad for a woman to say benching. It's always like a curse on the family, then we won't. But if we say, oh, like the response to the Gaonim, well, it depends on the context. It depends on what's going on in that family. It depends on what's going on in that society. And if it's seen that way, then maybe we shouldn't. But if it's not, then maybe we could or should. Context matters. Like I spent a Shabbat in Borough Park maybe 10 years ago. Uh, it was wonderful Shabbos. Context was so different, right? In that world, in my Borough Park Shabbos, it was really cool. I love the Sfas Emes, this family. They had all these Rebbe, what I thought were Rebbe pictures up on the wall, but they were actually, and it was the Sfas Emes and the Imre Emes, like some of my big Hasidic Gedolim, but they weren't Rebbe pictures. It was Zaidi pictures. Zaidi was the Imre Emes, and Alter Zaidi was the Sfas Emes. It was like unbelievable. Yeah, it was really cool. But in this world, oh, I'll tell you who it was. it was a Shabbos in the publisher of Hamodia. Hamodia, maybe you know, is like one of the leading Haredi newspapers in the world, published by a woman. But when it came time for Shabbos and everything was completely separate. Two Shabbos tables, one in this room, one in that room. Like we didn't even see the women. Like just very briefly, she like would kind of put her head into here kiddush and then went back to the women's table. This is like one of the most powerful Haredi people in the world, the publisher of Hamodia. But when it came for ritual things, like just complete separation, and for her to come in and lead benching would have been wildly inappropriate in that setting. Wildly inappropriate. And I always say this in general, like I don't believe that every Orthodox family, every Orthodox shul, every community should do X, Y, and Z. Every community shul family should do within the bounds of halacha what's appropriate for them. So in our shul, it's great to have women playing spiritual leadership roles. It's within the bounds of halacha. It serves a need. It's really important. In other shuls, it would be a terrible idea to have women serving as, public spiritual leaders of the community for lots of reasons. One is not right or wrong. This is just the reality, and I think the context really matters. And we should be sensitive and respectful of context. Like I don't knock what was going on at Borough Park. There's some very beautiful things about that community. There are actually ways in the Haredi community where women have tremendous levels of power and advancement within women's circles, and can do things, really incredible things that are not available in some kind of modern Orthodox spaces. So there's no judgment here. Again, I think it's like about being sort of honest and encountering the sources and then just thinking about the different ways that they can be interpreted and paskins. Judith, you had a question? I think you're muted, Judith.
Just a brief comment that might put it in perspective a little bit. Um, a Chinese student at Northwestern wrote a very interesting op-ed piece about Western concepts of masculinity, and he suggested that maybe we should learn more from the Eastern, that is, Asian notion that to be a man, the masculine ideal was to be a scholar, a learned person who was wise. And I think that's what's at issue here. Judaism kind of demands that people learn to read, learn to pray, daven and whatnot. And this is a way of kind of guilting men for whom it would be so easy to let that slip and just, be very superficial about it because there's so many other demands that would take them away from study.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's not that the women are less capable, but they don't want anyone to stand in the way and provide excuses for men not to reach that level of obligation where they're unable to fulfill the obligation themselves.
The point is taken, and to the broader point, I think about gender roles in Western society versus in Jewish society. I think there's a lot that's been written on this, but it's one of the things I love about our tradition is that in all these roles, there's great variance and diversity, right? We don't have like a single archetype, an archetypal role of a Jewish man or a Jewish woman. Jewish men, we have scholars, rabbis, the Adel Yeshiva Bacher. We have warriors, Yeshua, Ari ben Canaan, right? We have like business people good like we have all these different we have musicians, poets, King, David, so many different ways of being a man. And same with women. Women, we have homemaker for sure. We have prophetess, Devorah, warrior. We have Eshet Chayil, which is about a woman who's like handling the entire business, this massive business operation, and getting up on the roof and like fixing the roof so it doesn't snow in the house. Like very handy and capable and savvy. So we have like, we just have a wealth of these roles. And I think that's actually what Rabbi Berman was alluding to a little bit. Like there isn't just, oh, a Jewish woman must X, Y, and Z. There's a beautiful um, diversity of ways of being a Jewish man and Jewish woman, which I think should be celebrated. And scholarship certainly, is one that certainly today, Baruch Hashem, like we have those paths of scholarship available to all. I will say, the idea that that it was not always an ideal that men and women should learn in Judaism, and we have sources that actually discourage women from learning. Right? There are sources in the Gemara and in Avot that frown upon um, women's learning, teaching Torah to women. And looking back over the last 150 years, perhaps the greatest advancement for women in Torah Judaism was not out of modern Orthodoxy, was not out of feminism, it was out of the Beis Yaakov school system. Beis Yaakov, which you probably all know is like a very Haredi, very frum
Mm.
education system, was wildly radical and revolutionary because it said we're going to teach our girls Torah. And there was great opposition to it in the Haredi world. And it was a Haredi conversation. It wasn't like modernish people coming in and saying we got to teach girls Torah. It was in the Haredi world. They said, look, we want our women to pass down a Masorah. We want our women to be able to hold their own in a complicated world. Like we have to teach them Torah. And that cause was resisted and then won. Sarah Schneier, she was a Haredi founder of the Beis Yaakov system. So like that was one of the greatest innovations for women's learning in 2000 years, and that did not come out of modern Orthodoxy. And it is not a modern Orthodox institution today. It's a Haredi institution. So always, they say no innovation, but they're innovating just like everybody else. But that also opened the doors, of course, to much more women's learning, Gemara learning, Drisha, the 70s, and all the explosion of women's advanced learning in Israel, Kolalim, and whatever. So, yeah, it's worth mentioning. Yes. Is there a thought? Okay. Let's wrap it up. Oh, the hour's running late. I could talk about this all night. Okay. We'll wrap with the Rev Lichtenstein, the last source here. Lichtenstein, Soloveitchik's son-in-law, Rosh Yeshiva Gush, very, prominent modern Orthodox institution in Israel. Modern labels, Dati Leumi, call it different things, but Rav Lichtenstein is someone who really believed in engaging with literature, philosophy, science, and the encounter with that in Torah, and that Torah would be enriched and strengthened because of that. So he writes, in this connection, women's public roles, serious and responsible poskim, impeccably committed and with Catholicity of Torah knowledge should, I believe, give greater weight than, in recent generations, has been assigned to the dispensation of lasot nachat ruach lenashim. The idea that we should do things that are pleasing and positive for the spirit of our women, of 50% of our community, citing the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch as the basis for permitting what might otherwise have been prescribed. Right. So what he's saying here is that, like, look, if we honestly look at the halachic system, there is much more latitude and expansion starting all the way back 2,000 years ago in the Gemara and continuing forward with this expanding of women's roles and taking on more responsibilities and women's education. Like, we should be actively pushing, is what he's saying, more dispensation, more permitting things that you could maybe go either way, right? Maybe you could say, oh, like the Gemara says you can, but also they say maybe you shouldn't, right? Even though you can, maybe it's not nice. Rav Lichtenstein is saying like we should push. We should push to do this for our women who are bringing, our Jewish children to the world and who are thinking and smart and creating and generating and like for their sake and not all, but some are struggling, like saying like this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel, it doesn't feel fair. I don't understand these differences, or I don't like the Abu Draham. That doesn't resonate with my experience. I'm not here to just serve my husband. I'm here to serve Hashem, right? Because of all those reasons, we should push and expand and do more. And that I think is, what I would summarize as like the modern Orthodox, as I understand it, approach. Let's look at what's on the table. Let's look and see what is possible. Let's do it within our halachic boundaries, but let's do it in the spirit of Chazal, who did something similar. Let's do it in the spirit of our Rishonim, who saw women's spiritual yearning and passion and did something similar. and let's continue that Masorah. It's not a new thing. It's an old thing of like, how can we, it goes back to Benot Slovchad, like, how can we expand and create more leadership and opportunities for women to participate more fully in our community? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And that's guided a lot of the decisions that we've made, with women's spiritual leadership and the design of the mechitza in the shul and other things. Like that is the spirit in which we are operating. Um, and I invite any feedback or questions you have.
Hmm.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, what we're
Sorry,
so,
sorry,
oh,
took me
yes,
another moment to unmute. Sorry, I'm always late to the party.
it's all good.
Um, building on, two of the sources that you've quoted. Um, so with this last one from Rav Lichtenstein, and also the earlier one about um, the person who can appoint their own shaliach. If a community decides that they can that to appoint a shaliach, then and if Ralph Lichtenstein is arguing for the expansion of women's roles, then could not a community decide to appoint a woman as their shaliach tzibur, which is by definition a shaliach?
Right. So I think in the case that one case, it was a shaliach where they were talking about the case of benching, where the level obligation was equal. I don't think one can could appoint a shaliach in a case where the level obligation is different. I believe that's the case. Um, but again, but I think a broader point that you're making, and I think which is an important one, is different communities might have different needs or different perspectives on things or different, realities. And what one community might sort of come to and decide within those halachic boundaries might be different than what another community might come to and decide. And those are really important conversations. And also, like, th it's um the relationship between communities, like that's going to be there's going to be a conservative force, right? Because people like a natural sort of holding back a little bit, which is inevitably a part of any orthodoxy, and I think is can be very healthy and important. Can be ossifying too, right? There's always that what's the right amount. And of course, with all this, everyone will say, like the level that my level of like balance of tradition and modernity, whatever, is the correct balance. Everyone who's to the right of me is a fanatic, and everyone who's to the left of me is like a total off the derech. And like everybody will say that no matter where you are. Like everyone feels that way about their path. That's just a reality of identity and community. But communities thinking for articulating, thinking through these things, talking about them, creating a shared set of understandings and values, I think is really important. And that's also part of what we're trying to do in this series is like have this conversation and talk about like how do we feel about all these issues and create the language for it. So that's part of what we're trying to do now.
So follow-up question, just in
Yeah.
terms of the mechanics of shlichut, to take what the like the farthest example in the opposite direction that I can think of, um, that you're saying, you can't appoint a shaliach to do something for you that where the obligation is not equal. Um, you know, a man can appoint somebody as a shaliach to deliver a get to his, soon to be ex-wife. Um, the person who is delivering the get has no obligation to deliver a get to this woman. Um, but um, he can fulfill his obligation by means of appointing a shaliach who has no obligation who.
Well, no, that's a different thing. That's
Mhm,
not fulfilling the obligation. That's someone
mhm.
sending someone as an agent to perform a specific task.
Okay,
So the
okay.
concept shlichut these are
Mhm,
complicated halachic topics, and again, I'm
mhm,
not prepared to like give a full a
mhm.
full discourse on the concept of shlichut. In general, I will say shaliach
Mhm.
tzibur is more than just a shaliach. They're also being motzi.
Okay.
They're being motzi the chiyuv of the rabbim, right? So
Mhm,
there's two parts there. So yes, for to be a shaliach, to like deliver this thing or give
Mhm.
this tzedakah, like anybody can do that. But to be
Mhm.
motzi, the chiyuv of the rabbim, there does have to be this similar level of obligation.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm done for now. For now.
Great. Look, and again, the purpose of this is to start these conversations, and I'm grateful to everyone for signing on. And next week, Rabbi Nichel will lead an important learning, drilling down to this even more around like prayer spaces and Torah reading, and how these some of these things play out, and how different approaches and groups have struggled and wrestled and tried to come up with practices that engage all these things we've been talking about tonight and are suitable or not suitable, whatever, for different communities. That's what we're going to learn next week on Shabbat, and then again on Monday night with Rabbi Chow. Thanks, everybody. Lila Tov.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Hmm.